Well, good morning, everyone. My embarrassment, relaxing upstairs happily, thinking I had another hour. My iPad woke me up, but my alarm clock stayed fixed on yesterday's time, so I'm laying there looking at my alarm clock thinking, oh, what a casual morning. So we have a great treat today. Dr. Jeffery Long, one of my favorite speakers, actually, deeply educated, deeply sincere and earnest in its practice, and so always very uplifting for us. And the topic is not one to sneeze at this morning either, called Relativity and the Harmony of Religions, Reflections on Einstein and Vedanta. So this will be recorded. You can take your notes when you listen to the recording later in the week and give your full rapt attention this morning to our brother. So it's my joy to give the podium to you, Dr. Long.
Thank you so much for that wonderful introduction, and it is my joy and my gratitude and delight to be here with family again. I've spoken here a number of times and always really enjoy it. And it's funny that one of the topics I'm going to mention today is the relativity of time, and we're hearing an example of that in terms of yesterday's time and today's time, and how that can trip us up sometimes. Right? So namaskar, namaste, good morning. It's a great privilege to once again have been asked by Stuart Maharaj, Swami Atmagyanananda, to speak here at the DC Vedanta Society. This wonderful community really does feel like a family, both to me and to Mahua, and we actually don't get to come here as often as we would like, so we're very grateful to be here today. Whenever I'm invited to speak at a Vedanta Society, I like to look at the calendar and come up with a topic that's appropriate to the time that I'll be visiting. Spring is, of course, coming soon, and tomorrow itself marks the colorful festival of Holi. It would therefore have been natural to choose a topic related to renewal and rebirth. The month of March, however, is also the month of my birthday, March 14th, a birthday that I share with a person whom I've admired throughout my life, namely Albert Einstein. So when I hear March, I think Einstein. So that was the topic I chose for today. I would like today to speak not only about Einstein himself, but specifically about the many analogies that can be drawn between Einstein's theories and worldview and the teachings of Vedanta. In particular, I've long believed that the concept of relativity exhibited in Einstein's theories about the nature of space and time can be seen as an excellent analogy for the concept of the harmony of religions found in the teachings of Sri Ramakrishna and Swami Vivekananda. My aim today is to show the relevance of Einstein's thought for understanding a number of aspects of Vedanta and the harmony of religions in particular, which is what I'm going to conclude with. My hope is to avoid becoming too technical, so I hope I don't, while at the same time representing Einstein's ideas and using them in ways that are accurate and that have scholarly integrity. I'll begin by noting a couple of things. First, I'm not a physicist or a mathematician by training. I don't know if any of you remember the commercials with the actor who said, "I'm not a doctor, but I play one on TV." Does anyone remember those? So I'm not a scientist, and I don't even play one on TV. I do have, though, a long-standing interest in science, especially astrophysics, and even more so in the various philosophical and even religious implications of the developments that have occurred in the field of physics in the last century or so, since Einstein first published his theory of special relativity in 1905 and his theory of general relativity in 1916. I also have excellent colleagues at Elizabethtown College, Dr. Mark Stuckey, who is an astrophysicist, and Dr. Michael Silberstein, who is a philosopher of science, with whom I regularly consult in order to ensure that I represent these topics correctly whenever I draw upon them in my work, as I'm going to do today. Secondly, I'm far from being the first person from the Vedanta tradition to take an interest in Einstein and to see Vedantic overtones in his thought. When I first suggested today's topic to Stuart Maharaj, he informed me of a wonderful little book with the title Albert Einstein, His Human Side, by the late Swami Tathagatananda of the Vedanta Society of New York. And I've drawn quite a lot upon that book in putting my remarks together for today. I would also like to share an anecdote, a memory that I feel is relevant to the topics I'm going to be exploring today. I had a friend who once commented that for the Chinese tradition, and in particular the Taoist tradition, with which he had a special bond and a special interest, he said, in that tradition, spirituality is an art, but that for the Indian tradition, and in particular Vedanta, spirituality is a science. This is, of course, a huge generalization. Certainly there are scientific aspects of traditional Chinese spirituality and senses in which living a Vedantic life can be seen as an art. And of course the case can be made that science itself is something of an art, and art something of a science. But my friend's noting of the scientific character of Vedanta rang true to me as capturing a certain intuition about the nature of this tradition, and resonates with an understanding that Einstein, seen by many as the archetypal scientist, was in certain respects deeply Vedantic. He had no formal affiliation with Vedanta, but you're going to see how certain aspects of Vedanta can be reflected in his thought. The first topic I'd like to explore, and for which I'm especially indebted to Swami Tathagatananda's work, is Einstein's overall spiritual temperament. I would like to then move on to some very broad links that one can find between the worldview suggested by Einstein's theories and the teachings of Vedanta. And I'll conclude by drawing an analogy between the concept of relativity found in Einstein's theories and that found in the teachings of Sri Ramakrishna with regard to the harmony of religions. So the first section I would like to get into, I've titled Einstein's Spiritual Temperament, the Universe as Ishtadevata. And I realized as I was writing this today that if I have an original thesis today, that is it, that the universe itself can serve as one's Ishtadevata. The religious traditions of Einstein's heritage was Judaism. Though he was not religious in a conventional sense, he nevertheless drew deeply from the ethical sensibility of the tradition of his birth. He was also very strongly influenced by the philosophy of another great Jewish thinker, Baruch Spinoza, who lived from 1632 to 1677. Spinoza himself was not an Orthodox Jew in terms of his thought or practice, but his philosophy is simultaneously deeply rational and profoundly spiritual, being infused, like Einstein's thought, with the ethical emphasis of Judaism and a deep sense of the omnipresence of divinity, which draws from the Kabbalistic tradition of Judaism. According to Spinoza, the universe is one, and there is no ultimate distinction between the universe and that divine reality to which we conventionally refer as God. This idea of pantheism, the teaching that all is God and God is all, is of course quite close to the teaching of Advaita Vedanta, that sarvam khalvidam Brahma, that is, all this indeed is Brahman, in the words of the Chandogya Upanishad. We shall see that the idea of unity plays a deep role in Einstein's thinking as well, as can be perceived in such insights as the ultimate unity of matter and energy, that matter and energy are the same basic substance and that each can be transformed into the other, or that space and time are not so much distinct realities as that time is a dimension of space, and that space and time together comprise a singular entity to which we may refer as space-time or the space-time continuum. It is not a great leap from insights like these to the idea of the unity of the cosmos and God. Such thoughts came quite naturally to Einstein, who saw the cosmos itself as at least a manifestation of divinity, and the study of the cosmos and the laws by which it exists as a kind of spiritual path. This is a topic on which I would now like to quote him at some length, for the words that follow provide us with an excellent window into the nature of his spirituality. So here, these are the words of Einstein. The most beautiful thing we can experience is the mysterious. It is the source of all true art and science. He to whom this emotion is a stranger, who can no longer pause to wonder and stand wrapped in awe, is as good as dead. His eyes are closed. To know that what is impenetrable to us really exists, manifesting itself as the highest wisdom and the most radiant beauty, which our dull faculties can comprehend only in their most primitive forms. This knowledge, this feeling, is at the center of true religiousness. In this sense, and in this sense only, I belong to the rank of the devoutly religious men. It is enough for me to contemplate the mystery of conscious life perpetuating itself through all eternity, to reflect upon the marvelous structure of the universe which we can dimly perceive, and to try humbly to comprehend even an infinitesimal part of the intelligence manifested in nature." End of quote. I would like to draw attention to several aspects of Einstein's thought as revealed in this extended quotation, and comment upon them from a Vedantic perspective. First, Einstein places a strong emphasis on the experience of the mysterious, which he calls the source of all true art and science. He also sees it as being at the center of true religiousness. He defines himself as religious in the sense that his entire life's work was motivated by the very same sense of awe and wonder, of the mysterious, that motivates the religious life. But he is also quite clear in affirming that he is not religious in a conventional sense, that it is in the sense of his work being rooted in awe and wonder, and in that sense only, that he belongs to the rank of the devoutly religious. If Einstein lived today, he might very well describe himself as spiritual but not religious, a term that's become increasingly popular. For spirituality of Einstein's variety, deeply felt but not moored to the conventional forms of religiosity, has increasingly become differentiated from religion, that is, from religion's outward forms, by people today. Einstein, though, notes that spirituality is in fact at the heart of religion, or at least at the heart of true religion, the center of true religiousness. Secondly, a feature that one cannot help but notice, particularly given Einstein's brilliance, and the fact that when we hear the word genius, the first person we typically think of is Einstein, is his modesty. He refers to the intelligence that is manifested in the marvelous structure of the universe as impenetrable to us, and says that we only dimly perceive this structure. The study of this structure leads us, in his words, to comprehend only an infinitesimal part of the divine intelligence. The emotion that this insight evokes in Einstein is not the pride that one might expect of a genius, motivated solely by worldly values, but rather a profound humility. Finally, we might reflect for a moment from a Vedantic perspective on the idea of divine reality as being, in Einstein's words, impenetrable. Einstein is speaking here of the impenetrability of the divine reality by the mundane intellect, even an intellect as brilliant as his own. He says again that the impenetrable manifests itself as the highest wisdom and the most radiant beauty, which our dull faculties can comprehend only in their most primitive forms. This is true from the point of view of Vedanta as well. A persistent theme of the teaching of both Sri Ramakrishna and Swami Vivekananda is the ultimate futility of the intellect, of mere book learning in the spiritual life, except, and this is a very important exception, to the extent that the intellect can serve to reveal its own limitations, thus serving as the jumping off point to a knowledge that goes beyond knowledge, that is, to the jnana, or God realization. This is not an anti-intellectual claim. It is a recognition that the intellect has a very specific role to play in the pursuit of realization. One on the path of jnana yoga must certainly go through the intellect in order to go beyond it. But one must also not remain limited to it if one is to reach the state of transcendence, the state of vijnana. In this state, God is no longer a topic of intellectual speculation. The vijnani, in the words of Ramakrishna, always sees God. He sees God even with his eyes open. Right? Seeing God as opposed to speculating or thinking about or even believing in God. For Einstein, as for Thakur and Swamiji, the most intense intellectual pursuits culminate in humility, in the realization that the higher reality of which one can get only the merest glimpse through the intellect alone is indeed real and is the foundation of all existence. In Einstein's words, it is the insight that, quote, what is impenetrable to us really exists, right? The fact that it's impenetrable to the intellect doesn't mean it's not there, right? It really does exist. Where we might say that Einstein and Vedanta possibly part company, though I'm going to take this back in a few minutes, is that Einstein does not indicate that he believes it is possible to go beyond the intellect in the manner of the vijnani, of a God-realized sage such as Sri Ramakrishna. Such a belief is, of course, a matter of faith, a matter of religion, until one has achieved realization for oneself. One achieves glimmers of such realization in the course of one's sadhana, one's spiritual journey, enough to light the way and encourage us to persist in our practice and in our belief. But as our realization gradually unfolds, faith is transformed into certainty and belief into knowledge, or rather into the knowledge that goes beyond knowledge, again, vijnana. I'm not sure what Einstein would have made of the Vedantic claim that there are human beings who have achieved this knowledge beyond knowledge, who have penetrated what he called the impenetrable. The fact that he referred to the highest reality as the impenetrable suggests that he would have been skeptical of such claims, and perhaps that's why he didn't affiliate to a specific religious tradition. Again, we should all be skeptical until we have experienced the reality of the mysterious for ourselves. The infinite is indeed impenetrable to the intellect alone. Or perhaps this is what Einstein also meant, and perhaps he might have been open to the possibility of an insight which transcends the intellect. We know, though, that Einstein was convinced that, again, what is impenetrable to us really exists. In the words of Swami Tathagatananda, Einstein, quote, did not believe in a personal God who punishes and rewards and has a will analogous to our own. Yet he had a very strong conviction about the existence of a principle or order that manifests itself in the world of matter and mind. He gave expression to his ideas in these words, as another quote from Einstein. The greatest scientists of all centuries of our civilization have paid tribute in some measure to the power and principle in back of the universe, the titanic first cause which still mothers creation. I'd like to draw our attention, as devotees of Thakur and Ma, to the fact that Einstein refers to the titanic first cause which still mothers creation. This instinctive reference to divinity as not the Father, the more common image for the divine found in both the Jewish and the Christian traditions, but the mother of the universe, displays from a Vedantic perspective the profundity of the spiritual depths to which Einstein's approach to reality could lead. Though we have noted that Einstein's path did not lead to an explicit affirmation of the possibility of realization in the full Vedantic sense, we have here perhaps an inkling that we should not close the door too quickly on the idea that a scientific intellectual path of the kind taken by Einstein, so long as it is properly grounded in the humility evoked by the idea of the mysterious, might lead one to truly profound levels of realization and insight. I would like to suggest that for a person who's not drawn to conventional religiosity and who is skeptical of at least a literal understanding of its claims, but who possesses the sense of awe and wonder that motivated Einstein and that he saw as central to true religiosity, the universe itself may serve as something akin to the Ishtadevata, or chosen deity, of the Bhakti yogi. Like the more conventional Ishtadevatas, personal figures such as Ram, Krishna, Buddha, Christ, Shiva, the Divine Mother, and Thakur himself, the universe itself serves for people like Einstein to evoke the very same sense of devotion and wonder as the personal deity does for personalistic theistic devotees. In both of these cases, from the point of view of Vedanta, the Ishtadevata, the personal deity of the conventional religious devotee, and the universe itself for the skeptical yet awe-inspired scientist, points beyond itself to the infinite reality which cannot be grasped fully by the intellect, but toward which the intellect's curiosity forever drives it. The fact that we have a hint, however small, that Einstein could perceive God as mother, not as a result of having been raised in a Bengali Hindu culture, for he was not, he was a German Jew, but as a result of his path of intellectual exploration, suggests that, like the other yogas, the path of the awe-inspired scientist is a genuine and effective route to God realization. My claim here that the universe itself can serve as an Ishtadevata to one who is skeptical of conventional religious views is not only based on the fact that Einstein once referred to the first cause as mothering the universe, suggesting a convergence of insight into the nature of ultimate reality that transcends cultural and religious differences. A skeptic can, of course, claim that this was a mere figure of speech on Einstein's part, or that the idea of the divine as mother is one which makes intuitive sense, especially if one sees the universe as emerging from God rather than as an entity altogether distinct from the divine. If we think of God as Father, we tend to think of creation as God on the one side and creation as an activity that is being engaged in outwardly. Whereas when you think of God as mother, you're thinking of something giving birth to something else, something giving rise to something from out of its own being. My claim that the universe can serve as an Ishtadevata is based on the fact that, according to Vedanta, the universe is itself the manifestation of Brahman. This is the insight of the Vijnani. To cite the words of Sri Ramakrishna, this is from the Gospel, what is Vijnana? It is knowing God in a special way. The awareness and conviction that fire exists in wood is jnana, or intellectual knowledge. But to cook rice on that fire, eat the rice and get nourishment from it, is vijnana. To know by one's inner experience, as Einstein did, that God exists is jnana. But to talk to him, to enjoy him as child, as friend, as master, as beloved, is vijnana. The realization that God alone has become the universe and all living beings is vijnana. I would like to repeat that last sentence of Thakur's for emphasis. The realization that God alone has become the universe and all living beings is vijnana. If God alone has become the universe and all living beings, then why cannot the universe itself, no less than any living being within it, such as Ram or Krishna, serve as one's Ishtadevata, as the object of one's single-minded devotion and concentration? This indeed is how Swami Tathagatananda describes Einstein. Quote, he cultivated the monkish attitude of detachment and was deeply absorbed in the thought of the mystery in nature. His whole constellation of religious attitude, insight, and emotion are wrapped up in one brief invocation, mystery. It outstrips all description, eludes all definitions, rendering all accounts pitiably inadequate. This seeking of the eternal in creation was as arduous and compelling as it was adventurous and fulfilling. End of quote. So I'd like to move on now to my next section, the underlying theme of unity in Einstein's thought and Vedanta. If we move on now to unity, the underlying theme of Einstein's thought and Vedanta, we can begin with the conversation between Swami Vivekananda and another great scientific mind of the Western world, Nikola Tesla. In 1895, Swamiji met Tesla to discuss, among other things, the goal of proving mathematically the idea that, quote, force or energy and matter are reducible to one common reality, to which Swamiji refers as potential energy. The idea of the ultimate unity of energy and matter, that these are each modes of being or manifestations of a single substance, was something in which Swamiji was deeply interested. For his understanding, according to Vedantic philosophy, was that all phenomena are manifestations of the singular Brahman. Tesla, too, was drawn to this idea as the most elegant resolution of the question of the relationship of these two phenomena, matter and energy. Indeed, the idea of a unified field theory that would encompass all the various forces known to physics continues to be a deeply motivating one within this scientific discipline. The mathematical resolution of the relationship of energy to matter, though, eluded Tesla and was discovered independently not long after Tesla's meeting with Swamiji by Einstein. It's been asserted by some that a mutual acquaintance of Tesla's and Einstein's had passed on to Einstein the suggestion that matter and energy might be different forms of the same thing, but this claim's not based on very firm historical evidence. The discovery appears to have been independently made, and of course, given that Tesla and Einstein were both observing and inhabiting the same universe, it's far from impossible for their keen intellects to have come upon similar conclusions about its nature. The mathematical identity of energy and matter is, of course, expressed in what is possibly the most famous equation of all time. Anyone want to tell us what it is? Very good. You all get an A. Okay. E equals mc squared, in which E is energy, m is matter, and c is a universal constant, namely the speed of light in a vacuum. The insight that energy and matter are essentially the same thing, such that matter can be converted to energy through a process of radical acceleration, was of course foundational to the development of the atomic bomb. The fact that he played even a tiny role in the historical process by which the deadliest weapons known to humanity were invented and eventually deployed upon the civilian populations of Hiroshima and Nagasaki was a source of tremendous pain to Einstein and his one great regret in life. He was again deeply influenced by the ethical imperatives of the Jewish tradition in which he was raised and had a profound sense of personal responsibility. He therefore dedicated himself tirelessly to the cause of peace and to efforts to end the production of nuclear weapons and avert the terrifying possibility of nuclear war, a possibility that remains with us today. Because, to quote another great scientific mind, Carl Sagan, we cannot uninvent nuclear weapons. The knowledge is there. The idea of a unity underlying our existence is expressed not only in Einstein's resolution of the question of the unity of energy and matter, but also in his insight that time is a dimension of space, or rather that what we conventionally think of as time and the three dimensions of space are really all dimensions of the same phenomenal reality. To put it more concisely, that time is the fourth dimension of space, to which we can refer more accurately as space-time or the space-time continuum. The connection I'm making here with Vedanta is not to say that Einstein has in some sense proven Vedanta. It is rather to draw an analogy between the overall trend of his thought and that of Vedanta, namely an emphasis on the ideal of unity. Unity is a central theme of both the thought of Einstein and the teachings of Vedanta, and a theme to which Einstein appears to have been instinctively drawn. In the words of Pravajika Vrajaprana, quote, "The unity of existence is one of the great themes of Vedanta and an essential pillar of its philosophy. Unity is the song of life. It is the grand theme underlying the rich variations that exist throughout the cosmos. Whatever we see, whatever we experience, is only a manifestation of this eternal oneness. The divinity at the core of our being is the same divinity that illumines the sun, the moon, and the stars. There is no place where we, infinite in nature, do not exist." End of quote. Energy and matter, space and time, entities long held to be utterly distinct by philosophers and scientists alike. Einstein was dedicated to developing a unifying vision that could encompass all of them. If we add God and the universe to this list of classical dualities, we have a philosophy at least akin to Vedanta, and, as mentioned earlier, to the philosophy of Spinoza as well, who also affirmed the ultimate unity of the universe and God in his doctrine of pantheism. Vedanta might be better characterized not as pantheism, but as panentheism, the doctrine not that God is identical to the universe, but that the universe dwells within God, as within a field of infinite possibility. We might say that the universe is part of God if God were a being that had parts. According to Advaita Vedanta, of course, there's no division or duality within God, but only the appearance of such duality. And this appearance, of course, is known in Vedantic terminology as Maya. Spinoza's identification of God in the universe has indeed led many of his interpreters to regard him as an atheist, who, when he identified God with the universe, was in fact saying in a veiled way that nothing exists other than the universe. In Vedanta, of course, there is the universe, but there's also the infinitely expansive field of possibility known as Brahman, what I've been calling God. I prefer a more Vedantic interpretation of Spinoza, in which he is saying not that the universe exhausts the possibilities of the reality of God, but simply that this universe partakes of the nature of God and is created from out of God's own being. And this idea is, of course, strongly present in the Kabbalistic tradition of Judaism, which was part of Spinoza's inheritance, and we know from scholarship that he was informed by and drew upon this tradition. But this is a technical matter for scholars of Spinoza to take up, and we need not dwell on it further, except to say that the thread of unity that we find in the thought of Einstein, and which seems to create an affinity between his thought and Vedanta, might well be drawn from the thought of Spinoza, with whose work Einstein was very closely acquainted. And if Spinoza was indeed drawing, as many scholars believe, from the Jewish tradition of Kabbalah, which emphasizes a direct mystical experience of God, then we might see both Vedanta and Spinoza as tapping into the direct experience of Vijnana. There's a common universal source in these traditions. This, of course, brings us to the final discussion on relativity and the harmony of religions. Coming now to relativity and the harmony of religions, the topic with which I began these reflections, analogies can be seen here as well with regard to the theme of unity between the thought of Einstein and the teachings of Vedanta. Again, my claim is not that Einstein was saying the same thing as Vedanta, or that his theories in some sense prove Vedantic claims, but there are certainly affinities between the two which make perfect sense if we believe that Vedantic sages, such as Sri Ramakrishna, and scientists such as Einstein are both looking at the same reality from their respective points of view and utilizing the approaches appropriate to each of these. Although laypersons often speak of Einstein's theory of relativity, Einstein actually had two theories of relativity, the theory of general relativity and the theory of special relativity. We have, in fact, already made mention of the theory of general relativity, which involves the insight that time is a dimension of space, or rather that space and time together make up space-time. It further involves the insight that gravity consists of a bending or curvature of space-time. It's an insight that refers to the bending of space-time, and it's sort of mind-bending as well, right? That whenever you feel the pull of gravity, what's actually happening is that space-time itself is warped, right? It has shape, and it has plasticity and mobility. This insight revolutionized physics and marked Einstein's theory as a major advance from what had been the prevailing view of gravity, namely that of Isaac Newton. It is not that Newtonian physics was altogether mistaken. Newtonian equations function perfectly well if one is making calculations about the acceleration and velocity of medium-sized objects moving through space. If you want to launch a rocket to the moon, Newton's equations work just fine. But they do not work as well when one examines the behavior of either very small objects, such as subatomic particles, or very large objects, such as the universe itself. Newton knew that gravity existed and is indeed credited with discovering it, the famous story of the apple falling on its head, which I think is probably not true, but certainly he's credited with this discovery. But he did not know why it existed. He simply took it to be a universal feature of objects with mass, a kind of universal constant. With his concept of space-time, Einstein was able to explain why there is gravity, and also to account for micro and macro phenomena for which Newtonian equations had proven inadequate. I want to just briefly comment on this a little bit. I think this also gives us some insight into the idea of harmony of religions as well. Notice how we don't think of Einstein's worldview as having sort of toppled Newton's worldview. Rather, it includes and incorporates Newton's worldview and goes beyond it, right? That you take the earlier truth that you've understood and you build upon that. Swami Vivekananda once said that we never move from falsehood to truth. We move from lesser truth to higher truth. And this is a way to understand the various worldviews and religions as well, that we need not necessarily see what on the surface appear to be conflicting views as necessarily a case of, well, this one's right and the other one's wrong. It could be that the view that we think of as wrong contains some insight, but then that has been further developed in some other line of thought, right? So these things are all sort of nested within one another. To quote an even more recent brilliant physicist who's seen by some as having also superseded Einstein, Stephen Hawking, he actually has very charitable things to say about the old Ptolemaic worldview where Earth was the center of the universe. He says it's not that that's wrong, it's just that the math is much more complicated if you're trying to calculate the motions of the planets using the Earth as the center of the universe. Then once they made the sun the center of at least the solar system, then you have simpler math. But you can pick any point in the universe and just arbitrarily make it the center, right? So this is so it's basically saying it's not that anything is completely wrong or mistaken, but it can be superseded and assimilated into a broader view. Einstein's theory of special relativity pertains to the speed of light, which replaces gravity as a constant in Einstein's understanding. I should say the speed of light in a vacuum, right? Because the speed of light can actually vary, right? When it goes through water, it slows down a little bit and so on. But the maximum speed of light is the maximum cosmic speed limit, according to Einstein. Einstein demonstrates that as an object approaches the speed of light, its mass increases, and indeed approaches infinity. Thus, if an object were ever to reach the speed of light, it would attain infinite mass. And this is why it's considered impossible to reach the speed of light. This leads to the claim that it's impossible to travel at or beyond the speed of light, which science fiction authors have tried ingeniously to work around ever since. Because if you want to have a big epic story taking place in space, you can't have it taking thousands and thousands of years to go from point A to point B. Also, given that time is a dimension of space, when one moves through space at a rate that approaches the speed of light, time is also affected. This is not merely a matter of perception. Rather, time actually slows down as one approaches the speed of light. Now, if you were in a spaceship approaching the speed of light, you wouldn't feel, oh, my time is slowing down. You'd feel normal, right? You'd feel just like you do now. But interesting things happen. As a result of the special theory of relativity, we now know that if a person were to travel on a spacecraft near the speed of light and then return home, it might well be that for the traveler, the trip may have lasted a mere few months or even days, depending on how fast the ship was traveling. But back on Earth, years or centuries may have passed. A number of science fiction authors, again, have depicted this phenomenon to great effect. Probably the best recent film to have utilized this idea was the film Interstellar. Anyone see Interstellar? Go and see Interstellar. It's a wonderful movie, in which an astronaut goes into space when his daughter is a child and returns to meet her as an elderly woman. Well, he's hardly aged at all. Right? He's been gone a few days from his perspective. Comes back and practically a lifetime has passed. An older story is an old science fiction novel from the 30s or 40s, I believe, called Into the Darkness. And it's about twin brothers. And one of them goes on a space journey very close to the speed of light, and one stays on Earth. So the one that goes on the journey, from his perspective, he's gone a few months. He comes back, and his twin, remember they're the same age, his twin is elderly and in a wheelchair. And a whole lifetime has passed for him. What does any of this have to do with harmony of religions? I believe that drawing an analogy between Einstein's theories of relativity, especially special relativity, can be a source of insight into Sri Ramakrishna's teaching of the harmony of religions. Again, time passes differently for persons traveling at different speeds relative to the speed of light. This is not just an illusory effect. Rather, time actually slows down the faster one travels, and actually speeds up the slower one travels. This effect has indeed been measured in numerous experiments. You just put an atomic clock in a satellite, shoot it up in a rocket going really, really fast, and measure it compared to the atomic clock that you have here on Earth, and the time is different. And so this has been proven repeatedly. Time and velocity are intimately interwoven. Analogously speaking, God appears differently to us depending on a vastly wide array of factors, including, but not limited to, our cultural and religious upbringing, as well as such more individualized factors as whether we're primarily emotional, intellectual, active, or contemplative in our personal makeup. And of course, those correspond to the classic four yogas of Vedanta. This is why Sri Ramakrishna did not teach that the impersonal Brahman alone was real, and the personal deities of theistic religion a mere illusion, or that the personal deity was the true reality, and that the impersonal Brahman was its mere essence or emanation. These are debates. If you look at classical Vedanta, you don't see so much harmony of religions. You see more, okay, here's this view of Advaita, the impersonal Brahman is real, everything else is Maya. And then you have the personalistic schools, the Vaishnava schools, they say, no, that's not right. God alone is real, this impersonal Brahman is his essence. And so they argue back and forth. He also did not teach that God was really without form, with the forms of God being an illusion, or that God had a singular form, and that focusing on the God without form was an inferior path. Very early in the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna, when Mahendranath Gupta first visits Sri Ramakrishna, one of the questions he asks Gupta is, do you worship God with form or without form? And Gupta, who's a member of the Brahmo Samaj, says, God without form. And Sri Ramakrishna says, that's good. And then he says, but God with form is also good. He doesn't want you to reject the other side of the equation. And he did not teach that God was a being entirely outside of ourselves to whom we must submit, or a being entirely internal to the self, with all concepts of an external, transcendent God being mere projections. Sri Ramakrishna affirmed that all of these concepts of God correspond to actual realities. This is what Vedanta scholar Ayan Maharaj has called Ramakrishna's manifestationist approach to mystical experience. That the experiences of spiritual practitioners are not to be seen as mere projections on a reality whose nature they do not really reflect, but that ultimate reality is infinite and contains all possibilities. Possibilities which manifest when one focuses upon them through the practice of a specific spiritual discipline. This is really nicely reflected in the Bhagavad Gita. If you look at the 11th verse of the 4th chapter, Krishna says to Arjuna, he says, in whatever way living beings approach me, thus do I receive them. All paths lead to me. And Swamiji quoted this in his famous Sisters and Brothers of America speech in Chicago. I almost said Sisters and Brothers of Chicago, but he cited that same verse, that if you focus on God as Jesus, God will come to you as Jesus. If you focus on God as Krishna, Krishna will appear to you. And as I've suggested today, if, like Einstein, you focus on God as the universe, then the universe will open up its secrets to you. Ramakrishna knew this because of his own direct experience of practicing many spiritual paths and achieving realization through all of them. Ramakrishna had little use for theoretical knowledge. He wanted to experience, he wanted to be one of the people who cooks rice on the fire and eats it, right? Not to sort of reflect on, is there a fire? What is the fire like? He went all the way, right, into these experiences. So everything he says is based on that direct experience. Now, of course, again, if you have not had that experience, for those of us who haven't experienced God in that profound way, then if we believe what Thakur says, it's a matter of faith. We're drawn to it, we feel compelled by it for whatever reason. But for him, it was a matter of experience. He practiced this, and it was his reality. In the words of Swami Vivekananda, if there is one universal truth in all religions, I place it here, in realizing God. Ideals and methods may differ, but that is the central point. There may be 1,000 different radii, but they all converge to the one center, and that is the realization of God. End of quote. The connection with Einstein here is that just as those who travel at different velocities and thus experience time differently, because time actually is different for them relative to their varied velocities, those who pursue the infinite according to different forms of spiritual practice, operating with different worldviews which support these practices, experience the infinite differently, either as an impersonal absolute, or as a personal deity, or as the true self within, or as their suffering fellow beings, or as we have seen in the case of Einstein, as the universe itself. None of these is the final truth, with all the others being lesser manifestations, or even worse, delusions. At the same time, it is not the case that anything goes, and that reality is merely a matter of perspective. There is an underlying reality which shapes our perceptions and which is manifesting through them. Time, in Einstein's thought, is not merely subjective. Right? Time is what it is, and there are equations and calculations for showing how time is going to run when you're going at a certain velocity and so forth. To use another image, the elephant that is grasped by the blind men in the famous Indian story of the blind men and the elephant, a story of which Thakur was very fond. The elephant really is there, and it really does have a specific character. But this character is capable of such internal variation that everyone will experience it differently. And no one's experience will be wrong. Each of the blind men grasped a different part of the elephant and accurately described that part. But each of these experiences is incomplete. None will be comprehensive. Right? No one's experiencing the whole elephant. And even a person who comes and looks and says, aha, it's an elephant. They're not seeing the other side of the elephant, right? They're seeing the side of the elephant that they're looking at. Perhaps this is one of the reasons why Sri Ramakrishna undertook so many different spiritual paths. He wanted to see the whole elephant. So he wanted to see it as a Vaishnav Bhakt, as a Vaishnav devotee. He wanted to see it as the Divine Mother. He wanted to see it as the impersonal absolute of Brahman. He wanted to see it as Christ. He wanted to see it as Allah, and he did all of those. Each of these experiences grasps a real aspect of the ultimate nature of reality, but none of them grasps all of it. So, conclusion. Emulating Einstein's humanity and the importance of religious harmony. Einstein is famous not only for his scientific brilliance, but also for his humanity. He was a committed pacifist who, as already mentioned, recoiled in horror at the thought that he might have helped to bring the atomic bomb into being, that his pursuit of the infinite mystery could be so misused as to lead to untold suffering. We would do well to emulate not only Einstein's single-minded pursuit of truth, but also his humanity. The harmony of religions is not only a theory of the nature of ultimate reality and the various ways of reaching it, it also, like Einstein's theories, has practical applications no less powerful, though we can hope far less destructive, than the atomic bomb. We live in an era of deep suspicion and hatred, and even actual physical violence perpetuated in the name of religious and other ideological differences. In fact, I spoke on the topic of religious harmony on Tuesday in Delhi. And if you've been reading about some of the things that have been happening in Delhi, I felt that there was a very profound destiny occurring, that I happened to be months ago or scheduled to speak on that topic, and all of those things were happening at that time. So you see the relevance, right, definitely, of this idea of religious harmony. Now, the causes of these violent outbursts are many, and one could well argue that religious difference itself is the least of these, right? And this is another topic for another whole talk. But if you look at cases of religious violence throughout history, it really didn't come down to religion. Religion perhaps exacerbated it, but there's always some power difference between two groups. There's something else for which they are competing or struggling that really leads it to become a violent conflict. But most of the time, we find that people following different religious paths can coexist without difficulty, which proves logically that such difference is by itself an insufficient cause for violence across community boundaries. And I always feel like this is a neat little logical proof, right? We have in philosophy, we talk about a sufficient cause or a necessary but not sufficient cause. And if, as many people will say, religion is the cause of so much conflict in the world, well, that would mean that every time you get people together of different religions, they'd have to start fighting. But they don't. Right? They go shopping together. They do all kinds of things. They marry each other. Religious difference by itself is not a sufficient cause of conflict. Other things have to come in. But ideas do matter. Certainly the teaching that many paths can lead to the infinite, if we take it to heart, should lead us to respect these paths and their practitioners, and to see them as fellow travelers, or in the words of Swami Vivekananda, to again quote that great Chicago speech, persons wending their way to the same goal. It seems unlikely that simply promoting ideas of this kind will by itself lead to a peaceful world where there is no religious or communal conflict. These ideas have been present since ancient times, and the world nevertheless suffers from violence and religious persecution. And in the modern world, which has experienced the teachings of Sri Ramakrishna and Swami Vivekananda and Mahatma Gandhi, such violence, in fact, sometimes seems to have increased. I'll tell you an anecdote about this. So often we get so involved in our own work and what we're doing that we sort of start to think of ourselves as the center of the universe, which we're very clearly not. Einstein, and you don't even need Einstein to tell you that you're not the center of the universe. But I've been dedicating my life and my work for quite a long time to this work of promoting these ideals of religious harmony. I've been a scholar speaking and writing about these things for 20 years. And I sometimes fall prey to the ridiculous thought, I've given all these talks, I've spoken at Vedanta societies and universities, why is there still fighting in the world? It's a very vain thought, right? And in fact, once Maho and I were at the Ramakrishna Mission in Delhi, and we ran into Swami Atmapriyananda, whom I'm sure many of you know, and is outside. And it was as if he was reading my mind. And he just said spontaneously, he said, all these great masters have come. Thakur, Swamiji, Ma have come. Buddha, Jesus have come. And we're still fighting and having problems. He says, why do we think that we can make anything any better? Right? So it was really a lesson in humility. But we have a duty, right? We have a dharma to speak the truth and to contribute whatever we can to this cause. And to quote another philosopher, David Ray Griffin, whom I greatly admire, belief systems matter and have an impact on the kinds of decisions people make in their day-to-day lives. Griffin says, quote, the human proclivity to evil can be greatly exacerbated or greatly mitigated by a world order and its worldview. Modernity exacerbates it about as much as imaginable. And by modernity, he means sort of our very materialistic drive toward more and more maximization of material goods. We can therefore envision, without being naively utopian, a far better world order with a far less dangerous trajectory than the one we now have. It is in the hope that Sri Ramakrishna's teachings of religious harmony might mitigate the current world situation, and that the humane spirit of Albert Einstein, which these teachings share, might come to infuse all of humanity, that I humbly offer this presentation to you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Long. All right, well, we've got a standard week coming up. Swami A and B will only be gone for one more week. Next week they'll be here on the 16th, I think, the 14th for the other, maybe. Don't take those dates down. This coming week, we're going to have a discussion by Sister Eleanor Francis. So next Sunday will be Sister Eleanor Francis, even though in the bulletin it says it's Swami A. So we'll get a chance to hear some other perspectives on things. This week we'll carry on as usual. There'll be no Tuesday morning or Thursday morning class. There will be a Wednesday morning class and a Wednesday evening class and Friday evening classes. Friday evening this week is going to actually be the Bhagavad Gita, and Wednesday night the Viveka Chudamani. Wednesday morning will be the practice of the presence of God with Brother Lawrence, and you're invited to all of those things and to just come use this temple as your meditation shrine this week. And stop in and say hi, take a walk, have a cup of tea, and provide that spiritual company to each other. At this point, we'll go downstairs and talk about what we've heard and ask questions and have coffee and tea and enjoy that holy company. So, Jai Ma, Jai Thakur, Jai Swamiji.